special air for me, because the first time I encountered the work of David Morison Portillo and Rihan Yeh was in a conference organized by Rihan Yeh, Saiba Varma, and other people, that a conference that happened in Tijuana and in San Diego. And in the conference, they presented their project, and it was, I think, it was very starting to listen them talking about it. So I am going to introduce the authors of the book. And so just give me a second between I navigate, while I navigate between windows. Okay, so David Morison Portillo is Mexican-American and lives in the United States. Currently, he's working towards his PA in philosophy, but before that, he worked as a strategist for a company specializing in human resource development. In this capacity, he has worked on projects for the government of Thailand, the US Department of State, Asylum Access, and other organizations. His interests include politics, philosophy, peace, refugee rights, and art. Rihan Yeh is an associate professor of anthropology at the University of California, San Diego. She studies the effects of the US-Mexico border on public life in Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico. Her first book is titled Passing: Two Publics in a Mexican Border City, and was published in 2018. So I just a quick, before we start listening to their presentation, I want to thank Printed Matter for the opportunity to participate at the fair. The fair is not only one of my favorites, but is an amazing space for independent publishers, for artists, for different types of publications that come from a different space of thinking, of producing, and it's connected to art in a very vital way. So I'm very excited that we're part of the fair. And of course, I want to thank the authors and the audience that is today with us. So a couple of things. You can leave your questions in the chat on YouTube, and we'll make sure that the authors answer them. So thank you so much. And please, David and Rihan, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Lorena. Could you put the video so that people can see all of us at once?
Yes, let me do that.
I do want to emphasize, thank you, Lorena, for the introduction. And I do want to emphasize that we won't stop until all questions are answered. So please leave them in the comment section or the chat section.
So maybe we should start also by thanking Printed Matter for the space, thanking Taller California, and I think above all thanking Lorena for doing this book with us and for her interest and for making this happen. For me, it's been yeah, a really interesting, exciting learning experience.
I feel just the same. It's a lot of work putting it was a lot of work putting this book together, and I think it shows in the quality, and well, more to come.
Perhaps we should start so that I think that there's a blurb on Printed Matter's website that just says, you know, sort of that you have this project, the book is about this project that you have, David, and that it involves picking an evening and then crossing repeatedly. But maybe we should start by telling folks just a little bit more about what it is that you do and what the book is about.
Yeah, just to help people who may not be familiar with the border crossing visualize what's going on. It's going round and round in a circle between two countries. I don't mean at the demarcation line and just spinning right there. I mean actually going through customs, as you can tell by the background, and exiting towards Mexico, as you can tell by that background. So as soon as you enter the United States, you leave to Mexico. As soon as you enter Mexico, you leave to the United States. So you're in a constant circular motion, not quite a circle that you do, but you're in a constant lapping motion. And because of this, I get to interact with a lot of federal officers. Um, and because of this, I've gained a lot of experience with the border and with the way that officers are operating is something I get to witness more than other people, I think, and more detailed and with a lot more. Yeah, I would say that's to give an idea of what the project, what it is I'm physically doing.
So David has been doing this pretty regularly for just over 2 years now. And I met David about a year and a half ago. So he'd already been doing the project for a little while, for several months. And I heard about it from a friend who introduced us. She said, oh, there's this guy, we're going to this party tonight, and this guy's going to be there, and he's got this project I think you're going to be interested in. And then I found that, actually at the gathering, we ended up talking, the group ended up talking a lot about David's project, and there was a sort of little controversy over it. There was a fellow who was saying, well, you can do that because you have the time, and you can sort of waste your time doing this. And, I don't have time for this. I cross the border every single day. I take my kids to school in the US. And this was the party was in Tijuana. And I found myself, even though I had just learned about David's project, I found myself jumping into the discussion. And yeah, I found myself, I remember that, I don't know your memory of this, David, but I remember that I was like arguing with this guy about why, well, that's why David is doing it for you, because you can't do it. And so that was sort of my introduction to this.
He was really sort of outraged at it. He was like,
Yeah.
how can you do this? How do you have the time?
Yeah, which I think is really revealing, again, about expectations that that we have about the border and what the space is, and how, everyone wants to sort of get through it really fast. But what is it that we're getting through, and how does our desire to get through there fast help sustain the kinds of interactions and the kind of dynamics of state sovereignty that get enacted there? So the project actually started, I think how it started is important for understanding what it's all about. Maybe you should talk a little bit about that. It started very accidentally.
Yes, it started one day in January in 2019. As I was crossing the border, I happened to have to cross the border twice that day, hours apart. On the first time, no soap in the bathroom. Second time, hours later, still no soap in the bathroom. And that ticked me off, to say the least, because it always seemed like I would tell an officer, hey, there's no soap in there. And they would just say, okay. And I would just assume that they would tell somebody, hey, soap in the bathroom, please. It seems like a very banal request. And I found that nothing happens when you ask for soap. So I couldn't stay at the border, as they told me. It was sort of attitude like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So I proceeded to cross the border over and over again as a workaround to that no loitering policy. So in a way, I could be at the port of entry and at that space and looking over to make sure that, I don't want to sound like their supervisor, but that things didn't go ignored. And so I crossed over and over that evening, and I got a bit of attention from officers. And I decided the next day, I think I might be onto something. And I went back. And by this point, a man who introduced himself to me as the supervisor of the supervisors, told me, "What are you trying to do? Break some world record or something?" So I knew they knew that I was onto something. And ever since then, every now and then I go and repeat the process of crossing the border over and over and over and over again. It's gained me a sort of celebrity status among federal officers at the port of entry, among CBP, GSA. I've even had DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and officers telling me that I'm famous. I'll ask them, "Do you know who I am?" And they'll say, "Yes, you're famous." So more officers know me than I know them. And I certainly couldn't keep up with all of their names. So I have to take some notes, though there are some very memorable ones. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your original interest in the project, Rihan?
Yeah, so I'm a professional anthropologist. I get paid to do anthropology, and my field work is in Tijuana. So I've been interested in the port of entry and the sort of relationships that people, all different kinds of people in Tijuana have to the US, and what that means for Tijuanense society, what it means for what kind of a Mexican citizen you are, what the sort of privilege or apparent right that is not a right to cross the border means for people who are living in their own country and not in the United States. Like, what is the role of this foreign government in people's lives? So I've been interested in the port of entry for a long time. That was why our friend knew that I'd be interested in David's project. But I'd sort of approached it in a really traditional ethnographic way. That is, like, I paid a lot of attention when I went through the port, but obviously, like, I'm my own person, and I have my own, I get interpolated, I get spoken to in particular ways. And there's certain things that happen for me that aren't, representative of other people's experiences of the port. And I pay attention to what happened to me. I'd try to pay attention to what was happening around me. I'd take notes on that, and I would collect other people's stories. So I always paid a lot of attention when the port of entry came up, when people narrate it, because people talk about it all the time. Everybody has stories of things that have happened to them when going through the port of entry. And there's tons of them, and there's a lot of indignation, at the same time that there's for a lot of people, a lot of investment in that privilege, in being able to, like, cross with authorization into the US and go shopping or do whatever. So when I met David, it's like, oh, this is a really, this is a kind of, if you think of what David does as an ethnographic method, it's sort of an experimental ethnographic method, because he's not sort of trying to observe what people usually do or what usually happens. He's sort of throwing himself into the state apparatus and putting that, that machine sort of into overdrive. So it's like, every time he goes through, that's a little experiment that produces something a little bit different. So this is also something we've talked about a lot, is how it never gets boring. And that's sort of surprising sometimes to people who are used to sort of avoiding going through, because it's like, well, you wait in line for hours, and then, it's always same old. Sorry, go ahead.
No déjà vu.
Yeah, but when you start paying attention to it and you do it over and over in the way that David does, one of the things that he tells me he's always struck with is how it's constantly different, and every little interaction, you build up these patterns, of course, and but it is like a study of the officers of the port of entry that he's conducting. So that was what was really interesting to me, and I was like, I want those little anecdotes. I want to know exactly what happened. I want to know, I want a good record of exactly what was said and what the interactions are. So that was sort of where our conversation started, with, like, documentation. Like, are you building an archive? Like, what kind of archive are you building? How are you preserving a record of your experiences as you do this, because of course in the port of entry you can't record, right? You can't take a photograph, you can't do a voice recording, so it's all sort of, you can't do it in the moment, so you have to do it a little after. So that was where we began, was really just sort of the idea of like getting down some kind of record of what was going on, so that it wasn't just sort of, in David's memory. And turned out he already had sort of ways of doing this. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, David.
Yes, it wasn't until a few months after I started my project that I started to document more and more my loops and keeping an archive of it. It used to be in my mind that I would only take major incidents, more specifically when officers got violent or they were physically, verbally abusive, or you get what I'm driving at. But there is a lot of to learn also from when nothing happens, and noticing why nothing happened, perhaps, or what officer. All these factors go into it. Seeing their behavior change from the beginning of my project to now. It's been a lot of help keeping that archive now. Rihan insisted that I please start taking more detailed notes. The way I do it, for example, I've done it a few ways. Originally, I used to write it down on a piece of paper with a pen as I was walking through. As soon as I was let go, and they proceeded to let me go, I would just write down, if I remember the officer's name, and quickly jot down a few words just to like spark my memory later. After that, I tried Snapchat, a private account where I would just post videos to myself so they would be saved there. And after that, I just decided to text it sometimes I text it to like my pharmacy number because they don't get the text anyway, but I just have a record that way because it'll mark the timestamp, and I can type more or less at the speed that I think. It's better for me than doing it by hand. And yeah, that's, if anybody wants to join me, I recommend you figure out the best way for you to take notes of the goings on of your own. You'll discover you'll have your own path. If you decide to loop, you'll have your own way of dealing with officers and the way they deal with you and the way they react and everything.
So the book does include a little guide, like Looping 101, for some tips for beginners. But this is actually, so recording was also one of the ways that I don't remember exactly how. I think I think that I asked you if you wanted to do a little oral presentation at this conference where we met Lorena. And so we started just putting together a little short, writing a little short presentation of your project for that. But as we worked on that, a lot of, we'd get together on Zoom and talk, and a lot of, the things that had happened, things that were said to you, things that you said, and a lot of these little anecdotes that I find so full of insight, and they would just come up. So then I'd say, wait, hang on, David. Let me type this down. So I basically just like try to transcribe as faithfully as I could what David was actually saying in that moment, like what his narrative was. So that's sort of close to the kind of field notes that I would do like as an ethnographer, just like trying to get down that story as close to the person's original wording as possible. And a lot of that then is actually like in the book. So a lot of it is David's original wording in narrating what had happened, and that then is, sometimes these anecdotes like stand on their own, sometimes they're incorporated into a more kind of theoretical reflection on what's going on, what it means. But that is, we have a whole sort of file these notes of things that come up, and they just continually come up, and David says like, oh yeah, I didn't tell you about this time when, Officer Bandman, I don't know, there's been a lot about Officer Bandman in there. But this is a major part of how the book was composed, and I want to emphasize also that like there's this sort of the changing nature of the interactions is partly because the officer's work seems to be they respond in they can respond quite idiosyncratically, right? So they're not sort of very well trained in public relations, and that means that there's a lot of variability in how they handle it. But also David, once he's provoked, also has all kinds of things that he comes up with in his interactions. So I don't know if you want to share some of that, David.
Yes, I'm not Bambi like. If the officers want to insult me, I comply with the invitation to throw insults at each other. But it's always been a sort of relationship where you know that they know more about you than you can get from the 10 seconds you talk with them. And they certainly don't have any public relation training. Any kind of interaction you have with them at the beginning, they will get mad if you talk out of turn, so to say. They want question answer kind of relationship. They really can't have a conversation with somebody for longer than a few seconds. And they sometimes, very often, can't help but throw a little snide remark in there. Really quite distasteful comments sometimes. As Rihan mentioned earlier, everybody has a story about the border and the officers. Not only one, but dozens. And I don't know if I should say, for example, you mentioned Officer Bandman. He was a big motivator to keep going because he slapped me against the wall, and he whispered in my ear, give me a reason, over and over again. So me giving him a reason at that point was apparently looping the border. So I kept doing it, and I did exactly what he wanted to. I don't know if you want to say like any other stories that you have from your experiences at the border.
Like me, my personal experiences at the border.
Or yeah, everybody has.
Everybody has. So I think that's one of the really like rewarding things also in presenting this, when we've presented this like to different settings, is the response that we get from people, and that people often respond with their own anecdotes, but also with a reflection, like looking back and rethinking what those anecdotes mean and how they behaved in those circumstances and how they might have behaved otherwise. There's a lot of insecurity in this, right? So major sort of fundament of David's practice is dual citizenship, right? So if you don't have, if you just have like a tourist visa or a laser visa for entering the United States, you might be a lot more careful about what you say because you fear losing it. On the other hand, that's not to say that citizenship, U.S. citizenship, is something that sort of has protected David in some absolute way, as his little anecdote about Officer Bandman underlines.
It wasn't until I started this project that my citizenship became of interest when I was crossing. Everything from them wanting me to tell them where I was born, which they know, they just want to hear it out of your mouth, and they sort of want you to hear yourself, and they sort of want to be like, you weren't born here, right? It's sort of menacing in a way.
It's completely menacing.
To them laughing and saying, we don't recognize dual citizenship. To what country are you going to, or are you trying to go to the United States? And I would say, you tell me, where do you work and where am I right now? And they'll just keep you there for a while sometimes in secondary. Though I've kind of grown some calluses for secondary, and oftentimes I find officers don't want me in there. I've heard them say, and it says in their notes, not to send me to secondary. Sorry for the little interruption.
No. One of my, so there again is an example of, you hadn't told me that about them telling you that we don't recognize dual citizenship. I do remember there was an incident that you told me about recently in which the officer was insisting, what's your citizenship? You say dual. What's your citizenship? Dual. What? No, but what's your main citizenship? I'm wondering it's 12:36, and I know that we started late, but I wanted to invite those watching to not just to make questions or pose questions or comments in the chat, but if you'd like, we're also open to having you join us here on the Zoom.
Yes, let's have a conversation. People don't come to things just to listen. They also want to talk.
So we'll post the link right now in the chat in case people want to join. And while we do that, I want to ask you also the question. Well, first tell you that, this aspect of the way you kind of break down the non-written rules of the people who cross, right? Which is, at least I cross with, I'm not a dual citizen, so it is, when I cross, I kind of, there's always the intimidation is kind of the protocol, right? And one responds to that in an automatic way. So one of the things that shocked me when I heard you talking about your project was that in these acts that you're doing, you're really changing that in a way that, even though it puts you in a situation also of danger or like of violence, nevertheless, you're breaking down something in an important way. And just the fact of, for us, for example, to answer to the usual questions like, algo que declarar, with a different answer, right? Just that the fact that the project is also about language in that sense, I think that's really, really powerful and very, very compelling in all of us who cross the border. It allows us to imagine other ways of being there, even though it's in a small way with words, for example. And so in that sense, I want to ask you both, what, in terms of writing the dialogue, we had conversations, and this was also very, very fruitful about, the crossing of languages, and then, what kind of, because many of the officers, that they themselves are bilingual or trilingual, but they also play with these, or not, right? Or they want to hide, they want to always push you into a category or into a space that where there's where you can't move. So also the use of language, it is also another way of kind of resist or protest, and also the writing of the book addresses these. So if you can talk a little bit more about the Spanglish, Español, English, and also what it means to think also the project in that way.
Was that a gesture that I should speak? Or like?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Lorena. So this brings us to the book itself. So the process of working together, I feel like, since we set out to sort of write an oral presentation, and we're like, well, let's do it, as a dialogue. So we'll have two voices, and that just as we worked over the piece, it began to take the looping became sort of a metaphor, of a figure that sort of took on different layers. So I feel like by this point in the book, there's this even like materiality or material performance of looping in the book itself. And there's this looping at the level of language. That was your phrase originally, which I really liked, David, because it is a bilingual edition, but not one in which you have sort of, and it has two versions of the text, and one is a translator. So they're mirror images, but the text also sort of enacts the border both, how shall we say, both vertically in the switching between the voices and also, or horizontally in the switching between voices as we move through time, and vertically, like if you happen to, if you want to follow the text in just one of the two languages, then you have to sort of move up and down across the two versions on the page, across this sort of boundary running down the middle of the book. So the text sort of enacts looping and movement at different levels. And we also sort of trade places eventually over the course of the text. You start in English and I start in Spanish, and then we switch places, and vice versa in the other version. So there's sort of multiple layers and levels there at which the text wants to suggest a kind of different relationship between the two sides of the border.
And since we're talking about the languages at the border, I want to make it clear, you can speak whatever language you want at the border. Officers may not like it. I only know English and Spanish. Sometimes I'll only talk Spanish to them. It's one of the experiments I've done on the state there. Different results. Sometimes the officer will pretend he doesn't speak Spanish, and then later it turns out they do. They just don't want to, or even if they reply to me, I don't even want them to, they don't have to talk Spanish to me. If they want to talk English, that's fine. I want to talk Spanish. So I've had results, everything from, oh, he's refusing to answer my questions, and then I have to tell the person behind the podium or the supervisor, that's a lie. I answered every question. To they will make an effort to talk to me in Spanish, as well as as well as calling another officer over and asking me, don't you speak English? Yes, I do. So that also is another language there at the border playing. But also another big thing about the text being dual languages is it reflects a lot, for me at least, the way I think. Sometimes I tend to think in English, but I do have some Spanish in there. So it was a very, very interesting book to write.
There's another, hi Philip. There's a Philip is in the room with us. And there was another sort of form of, or another boundary and sort of form of looping, or that is at stake in the text that I was thinking about during the copy editing process. Because if you think conventionally, there's a lot of sort of debates on this in anthropology. Is like, how do you represent the language? How do you represent the language of the people that you're working with in relation to your own voice in the text, right? So usually, conventionally, you have your sort of standard academic discourse that you're writing in, and then you'd have a quote. You have these ethnographic quotes that you embed, and there are all kinds of debates about, like, well, how standard or non-standard, like how much should you be standardizing that? Like, you don't want to make people seem really too non-standard. On the other hand, you need to be faithful to how they speak. And this is especially, since I do a lot of linguistic anthropology, like it's especially important to have, a good record of that represents speech and different forms of speaking that are not are not all, you know, standard. So in having two voices, this was really interesting to me. We wrote the text as a we wrote the text as a conversation. It's not literally like David wrote his part and I wrote my part. Instead, the voices, our actual like work, right, of writing is in both voices, and there is a certain contrast between the voices, but it's not exactly the same kind of contrast that you'd have that I was just describing of a like conventional kind of ethnographic text. So that to me is really important, is like what kind of different voice comes out of the writing process, where there is, you know, there are elements and there are parts that are sort of more standard academies, right? And there are other parts that are very idiosyncratic. And that's not only, you know, it's not only David, I also of course have my own idiosyncratic ways of using language and non-standard ways of communicating. But so the text is also playing with that boundary, is sort of questioning also like what is standard writing, what is correct language, and what are sort of the best ways to convey. Actually, I think we have some pretty complex ideas that we convey there about about performance, state sovereignty, the nature of politics, a number of things. And ultimately, the you know, the issue of violence that we've sort of touched on, that runs from, I think, part of the interesting interest of the project is in connecting, you know, something like the kind of disregard that's expressed in, you know, not refilling the soap dispenser, which is very trivial, except, you know, with COVID, it becomes quite non-trivial, you know, connecting that with the more dramatic things that do happen in these two ports of entry that you see in our backgrounds, that have happened there, which at the most dramatic end are state killings. So killings of people, civilians, by border officers. So for me, the point is also to connect those things, and the form of the book is a way of trying to get a different kind of grip on what this state apparatus does, and how we can connect with different publics and different readerships over that issue.
I don't know if there's going to be a video soon, but I would like to say, for example, what my, as well as you can say, what the main goals you hope the project accomplishes, or what your main goals for the project are. For example, for me, it'd be others to join me, as well as to demystify border officials and border interactions, and, you know, let people know that officers are not smarter than you. They really have limited power. It's mostly you allowing them to take advantage of, for example, you don't have to take the picture when they want you to take a picture. And I think, before carrying on, those would be my two goals, for somebody to join me, and for this to have a demystifying effect about CBP and the border as a whole.
So we have a comment question from Philip. Do you want to speak, Philip? Do you want me to just?
Sure. Hey, sorry, I thought there would be more people. I didn't mean to barge in on.
No, not at all. Welcome.
Thanks. I need to buy your book. I just joined because Lily told me about it, and I think it's brilliant. What a great project. Thank you for your work, David. I know that, you know, it takes a toll on the body and the mind, right? I mean, it's not just a performance that is separate from your somatic response, right? I mean, it has a deep effect on you. So thank you for doing that. I agree with Rihan's point that you're doing it for the people who cannot do it. And so in a sense, you're taking on a certain experience. Yeah, I was just wondering about the way commodities flow. I mean, if you look at the 1990s as the so-called age of globalization, what was it globalizing? Commodities seem to just like suddenly flow so much more easily across the world, right? And of course, commodities have flowed across the world, for 400 or so years, but the the border protocols for commodities seem to ease, while the border protocols for people seem to take on a kind of more racialized class. The kind of politics we associate with immigration was suddenly attached with so much brutality to human movement.
Thank you. I'm sorry. So I automatically looked at your name and thought Philip must be your first name, but that's not right, right?
That's not, Kavita is my first name.
Kavita, sorry about that.
Actually, it's really funny when I submit articles, I get much better reviews when reviewers mistake me for a guy called Philip.
Great, wonderful.
So that's fine.
You have a little loop in your name.
Yeah, exactly.
David, do you want to respond? I have plenty to say about the 90s and globalization and commodities versus bodies, but maybe you should go
I think
first.
you should take the stage.
There is also this question of somatic response. If I could like slip in there, maybe you want to respond to that, and then we can loop back to commodities and bodies, because one of the things, so David has used a lot like a metaphor of a playground, like let's sort of in the mode of like, let's take control of the space and like have a more playful attitude towards it, and not just be sort of cowed by it, but like let's turn it into a playground and sort of do things here. And the kinds of questions that he, or responses with which he engages the officers, like I really like, do you have anything to declare? A thumb war, right? This kind of thing. But at the same time, like I once when, going back to like, I was, when I was bugging him about recording, and I was like, why don't you try doing some voice recordings? Why don't you voice record? Like when you come out, just like narrate into your phone what happened. And like the next time that we met, David was like, you know what? I tried that and I can't do it because I'm so angry that my jaw is clenched when I come out and I don't feel like talking. And that was like a real, yeah, that was a revealing moment, because sometimes it seems like he's so like, the provocateur, or sort of able to like I'm a U.S. citizen. I can't imagine like talking to the officers the way David does, right? Yeah, David,
Yes, on the effects on the body. Well, certainly, walking is not the major thing here, but it's the stress, not only in that moment, but then you have to think about the way that officers get away with this, and that has a very real effect on stress and just feeling frustrated out of nowhere. And it's almost like they do it for enjoyment sometimes. It's almost like they get off on it a little bit. So for them, I'm sure it's a release to be able to mess with people. So it comes at the cost of other people feeling badly. Regarding the responses, my favorite is refusing to really give any info. I shouldn't give. Where are you going? Wherever I want. What did you do in Mexico? None of your business. Anything to declare, I will answer that. But other than that, I was just thinking now how much data they collect out of thousands and thousands of people every day that are under the impression that they have to answer these questions.
I'm going to read, because Kavita, I think that the people watching on YouTube can't see the comments here, and in Zoom. So let me back up a little. So Kavita, or do you want to just read your comments?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I appreciate the generous invitation to join, but I don't mean to be taking up people's time. Yeah, I completely agree, David. The kind of experience of coming out is very traumatic almost. And yeah, when you stand in those lines, you can watch them, responding. And, I'm sure you notice the kind of way that they treat like white families with kids maybe who are going for a vacation versus like racialized bodies of people who they feel they can treat differently. So yeah, there's that kind of pop anthropological aspect of just standing in the lines.
Yeah, and it's not just pop, it's street ethnography. Yeah, so about commodities and bodies, like I mean, I think there are very real reasons why that contrast has been drawn so much, and why like the speeding of commodities seems to stand so dramatically in contrast to like the thwarting and the violence, and people dying in the desert, and yeah, all of the real like lethal violences of the border that then get sort of plastered over, like, well, it's them going through the desert, we didn't send them there anyway. Well, they did, and they knew what they were doing when they started the prevention through deterrence policy. I think it's important to remember in both these cases that that's not I don't think it's so much a contrast between commodities and bodies, because at the very same time that, so if you think just of people's bodies, time that that prevention through deterrence comes in the 90s, that like the sort of death in the desert becomes a really big deal. That's the same time that they're also creating the secure electronic network for travelers rapid inspection, right? And now we have global entry, and so at the same time that they're trying to like block some flows, there's also all this like technologized projects to speed flow for other bodies, right? And to make the border maximally transparent or transductive for those who can cross. And it's not only US citizens, right? So Sentry is a program that's open to citizens of any nation, right? But you have to be vetted, and you have to be, you have to go through the whole procedure. And then you drive through without inspection, or you walk through with just a sort of your picture pops up on the screen and you're waved across, right? You don't even need to actually stop the car if you're going in your car. So I think that's important to see those together. And similarly with commodities, like there's all of these programs to speed, like very parallel to Sentry, like pre-inspection at the factories. So in the maquiladora, they have like the agents who go and inspect the cargo like at the factory site, and then like the semi is sealed and it's got like a special tag put on it, so like it's not it goes through the border then because the inspection happened before, blah blah blah. But at the same time, like you have there are commodities not go so freely, right? So you have like ramping up of criminalization of all kinds of goods, of drugs, obviously, but not just drugs, and inspection procedures and agricultural inspection. So there's yeah. So I feel like in both on the commodity side and the human body side, there's this real filtering and just like increase in sieving practices that are gonna really sort of, it's not that they're actually stopping anything, though to a certain extent, but really they're like creating differential value and different kinds of value. So like drugs get, I forget what like massive percentage of their street price comes from, having crossed the border. So it's like actually that is putting a lot of the value into the product. Yeah, I see you have another comment here, so.
So yeah, just kind of echoing you and learning from what you're saying. I love that clarification. So so some humans are privileged enough to travel, like the privileged commodities, which are usually commodities for kind of bourgeois consumption, and then contraband commodities and racially marked humans have a kind of different form of travel. Yeah.
Yeah, and it creates, the classic line is that creates, the border's really creating vulnerability. It's creating like an like hyper exploitable labor in the United States. So where that connects with David's project, I think like it seems the privilege makes that it creates separation. So it creates separation, like in this case, like amongst Mexicans. And I think one of the things that David's project does that I find interesting is like it starts to question that. And this isn't entirely resolved in my mind, but just by pointing out the sort of violence, like it's not the same violence, right? And it's not the same degree. And it's obviously very much a question, like you say, of who's racialized how and what bodies are marked and so on. But it's also like one always wants so much to feel like I'm free of that, like I got my papers and I can go through here and I can just like go shopping in San Diego or go enjoy something, and I have the right to do that. And I'm not like those people they're trying to kill, right? But it's like, there's these constant reminders that's like, no, you too, right? And it's not going to happen. They're not really going to kill you, but they could, right? So it's like, how do these how does David's project like show up this this sort of fundamental nature? Like they can make the port, they can beautify the port all they want, like the photos we have in our backgrounds are, the remodeled, renovated. The touch that I really love is like all of signs everywhere saying this port uses recycled water. It's environmentally friendly port. They can do that as much as they want, but they can't get rid of this sort of nature of state sovereignty as as sort of arbitrary violence. And being a citizen doesn't ultimately protect you from that, sort of in the last instance. And it's not just if you're a racialized citizen of the United States, but sort of, I'm very convinced that is sort of in the nature of state sovereignty, and that you see, for instance, like the use of the border to a few years ago to like restrict the movement of white U.S. human rights activists, right? So I feel like David's project is a good kind of reminder that that's there and that it takes different forms, but that it sort of does have to do with all of us and it does touch all of us.
Just on the comment of violence at the border, I myself have been, and I take this very seriously, threatened by officers. Most recently, Officer George, "I'll beat the fuck out of you," he said. And immediately sent a complaint, and I'm still waiting for a response. I got a call from CBP and I got an email, and they're still within their 30 days to respond. But if they don't, I will be calling up the number they gave me. But not to change the topic too big of a change. I do have my new CBP approved ID. This was given to me by CBP to use after they destroyed my passport and stole my old driver's license and called FPS, Federal Protective Services, on me, kept me chained up for 5 hours, let me go at the end. Very dishonest, thuggish-like behavior by them. But this is my ID that they issued me. I do wish I could use it out of the border. I'm only worried that they'll take it away, so that's why I haven't taken it back to use. But because I want to keep it forever, pretty much. But maybe I'll make a photocopy of it and use that. I think Lorena was about to speak, but I cut her off.
No worries. I wanted to just bring up a comment that Lily left in the in the chat on YouTube. And Lily says that, Lily Rani says that Sarah Sharma in her book, in the meantime, calls this chronopower, call this chronopower or something like that. Who waits, who loves, and what infrastructure investments structure that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. Thank you.
So David, about that ID, this is what you keep presenting, right? When you...
No, this is only because I'm afraid that they'll take it away.
Oh, I see.
Yes, I want to keep it. I might photocopy it and say, you know, Officer Ustash gave me this. This, in my mind, issued by CBP. Several officers were there, and I did use it once. They took it. Sometimes I use no form of ID at all. Just my name and my date of birth. But, oh boy, I lost my train of thought. The ID, sorry.
No worries. No worries. Well, I can, we're arriving to the time of closing these. So, well, you remember what you wanted to say. I want to also talk, really just remind you that you can get the book at the Printed Matters website, the website that we have during the fair. We're going to put it in the chat on YouTube, and also I want to invite you to read the book. You know, what they've shared with us complements in this really nurturing way what the book is. And what I've been thinking while I've been listening to you speak is that, you know, the book does all of this, as you mentioned, Rihan, in a way that by the dialogue is enough to kind of conjure all of these things that you're talking about. Like it kind of opens up all these doors, and then you can scratch and there's more and more. So in that sense, the book it's kind of light, but very, very heavy, right? And I think that's a quality that I really like about the text, that in this very short dialogue, there's so much to think about, and it's presented in a way that is very, in terms of it translates the experience so well that I think it's definitely a success in that sense, for, you know, of the text and how you wrote it.
I want to say also, thank you for saying that, but I just want to recognize that the design work that Lorena did makes it this is, I feel like what Lorena just said is not just about like the text that we wrote, but that the way that she designed the book and created it is, first of all, I think really, really gorgeous, but like conceptually completely unified with the work. So it's a sort of whole piece as a book. It's not just sort of a presentation of a text and the ideas that we've been talking about here. So
thank you.
So it was I felt like it was a real that it's been a real collaboration in that sense, and that's been very neat to see.
I remember now, Lorena. Yes, I was gonna plug the book, which you beat me to it. Available at Printed Matter, very reasonably priced, very heavy, very light, good reflection, and more to come. And
so if there are no more questions in the chat, I would like, I think we don't have any more questions. So I would like to invite all of you to watch the video that Philip Salata made for border looping. We went, I think it was mid-February, we went to see the second, to witness the second anniversary of border looping. of his project. So we were there with him, and then Rihan and David talk more about the project in the video. So I'm going to post that in the YouTube channel. So if you want to know more, please check the video, and that will remain there. So thank you so much, all of you in the audience, and obviously thank you so much, David and Rihan, for being here. And hopefully this will be the beginning of many conversations and the beginning of many border loopers, right? So
Yes, yes.
No, thanks to all of you for tuning in, and thank you to Lorena, and thank you, David, for all of this.
Thank you. Thank both of you and all the viewers at home.
And oh, we should explain your background.
Yes. Oh, thank you for bringing this up. I want to move a little bit. This is a poster that the artist from Tijuana, Ingrid Hernandez, a very important artist, curator. Also, she was in charge of, for many years, of this really important art school in Tijuana, Relaciones Inesperadas. She did this poster in collaboration with Peter Wiese, and what they did is that they asked people who usually cross the border to send them photographs, and incorporated signs that are around, like advertisements that they find at the border, with these photographs. So this is one of their projects, and this is the project that we printed also in the workshop, because Taller California is not only a press but also a printed workshop that collaborates with artists in producing different materials. So this is one of the things that we printed at the workshop. So please check out Ingrid's work. She's a very active member of the artistic community in Tijuana, and she's doing amazing work. So thank you for reminding me.
And because we're also hoping to include a version of this print in the book, because it also, as David says, like, well, in and out, that's what looping is. And the sort of pop culture reference to the burger joint was already something that David was playing with before we saw this piece. So we both really love it.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you, everybody,
Okay.
hopefully again in one of the events of Taller California. We have one more left for tomorrow. We present Mexipunks, an artist book by Ruben Ortiz Torres, again at noon. So hopefully you can meet us here in the channel, and we'll just post the link in a little bit. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you. So we should make our exit, except I'm afraid I'm
let me
okay.
just go. Oh, perfect. We have special.
Okay. Well,
except that, of course, David, you can't, because it looks like
I'm gonna be stuck in line for a little bit.
I'll see y'all. Bye.